看到各位真久无看吼，朋友搁倒转来，就比讲也教授夫妇了吼。林瑞讲伊是嘛足久无来，中讲是这种足不欢喜。即马下面要来介绍确实咧，我要用北京话来讲，因为伊听有，听懂。我要用北京话。给你介绍。在去年我去圣地亚哥的时候，跟朋友在谈，那朋友说，圣地亚哥 UC 圣地亚哥有一位对台湾很了解、台湾的社会很了解的教授，所以我就很高兴，我说我想要来找他。所以12月的时候，我们下去圣地亚哥跟他吃中餐，我那个时候就在谈，说你可不可能来跟我们谈一下？那他医生说可以啊。我没有想到他的抬头很大，他是那个社会学的 distinguished professor， 在 UC 圣地亚哥，同时是复旦中心的 director， 同时也是圣地亚哥的 college system Eleanor Roosevelt College 的 provost。我说他这么忙的人，我们这个小芝麻要请他来不容易啊。不过他一下子就答应，所以我们开始在谈时间，本来是说5月，是因为这是台美的传统周，所以我们本来是预定8号，不过他因为很忙，所以他说8号不行，那后来15号也是不行，22号可能太后，所以说改在1号，他说可以，那很高兴今天请他来。我在这里也简单他的背景写在这里。Sorry， 他是加州人，是北加州，就是本来去神学院，有天主教神学院，本来是不是想当神父？后来到哈佛去念社会学，他对那个Asian Society 很有兴趣，所以1968年去台湾，开始在辅仁大学学华语，所以我没想到他讲得那么好，不容易，就是几年。后来在台大社会系继续研究，72年回来以后进入哈佛大学社会学，在那里学以后后来得到博士学位，那么很早就来圣地亚哥 UC 圣地亚哥，在这里很久。在这个期间，他回去台湾，很多次了，所以他在70年代后面写了一本书，就是Religious Dharma， 叫 Democratic Dharma， 这本是他要介绍，那所以我想说，请他来讲这个台湾社会这个情况，这个宗教情况跟这个社会政治情况可能是最适合的。那我记得我们在谈天的时候，他说现在他主要负责这个中国来的学生，但学生很多了。他给他最大的头痛是，他们有一些人根本英文不通。那我说你考托福考过了，怎么英文不好？他讲了一句啥？他说有枪手。I repeat what you said, okay? Yeah. Without further introduction, welcome Professor Madsen.
Okay, well, it's good. I'll take care of it.
You can turn it around.
So, Dr. this introduction much too kind, 太客气，然后这个不好意思跟你讲。But I'm very, very happy, honored to be here, and especially since this is the beginning of Taiwan history, Taiwan culture. So it's always a great pleasure to talk about Taiwan and to talk with friends from Taiwan about some of the things I studied there. As Dr. said, I went to Taiwan in 1968. I was a member of the Maryknoll Fathers, Maryknoll. And our headquarters was in New York, but in Taiwan it's in Taichung. And I actually didn't want to go to Taiwan. I wanted to go to Latin America instead. But the superior said, you go to Taiwan, and that was it. So I came to, it was sort of an accident. But then I really, it changed my life, and I loved being in Taiwan and the experience of it. So I studied in Hsinchu. I'm sorry. First when I came, most of the Maryknoll fathers, unlike most of the other missionary priests and nuns, actually studied to speak Taiwanese. And most of the Maryknoll fathers, they worked in Taichung area, Taichung, Jianghua, Jiayi, those places. But they wanted me to go work up in the mountains with the Aborigines. And so then to do that, you needed to speak Mandarin. So I went to this school run by the Jesuits. At that time it was in Hsinchu. They moved it now to the main campus at Furen. And I studied Chinese for 2 years. Then I went to Taida. I lived in a dormitory there in so-called Fa Xue Yuan. And I studied sociology. I tell people at that time at the Fa Xue Yuan, one of the professors was Li Denghui, economics professor. And I was in 1971. One of my tongxue, although I didn't meet him, in the law faculty was Chen Sui-bian. He was finishing his law degree then. So, and interesting, that generation actually, a lot of them went on and became famous in one way or another in Taiwan history. And a friend of mine, Linda Arrigo, she comes from San Diego, and she was one of the first graduate in Chinese studies at UC San Diego. Later she went to Taiwan. She eventually, she married Shimingde for a while. And anyway, now she still lives in Taiwan, very active in causes. She was here visiting her mother in San Diego a few weeks ago, and she has a new book about Taiwan human rights and international networks, especially in 1970s. And so I'm in this book, part of my story. I told her a lot of long pieces on the Taiwanese Presbyterian Church and so forth. So that was part of my history. So I left Taiwan without ever having converted anybody. But in a way, I was committed to trying to be kind of a bridge builder, East and West and so forth. And so I got a PhD at Harvard, et cetera. And then I feel coming back to Taiwan is helping to fulfill some of that connection. Okay. So today, what I want to talk about is religious movements and transformations in Taiwan. And I'd like to contrast it a bit with also religious movements and transformations in China, in the People's Republic of China. And then we can talk a little bit about why the Taiwan experience overall has been better than the one in China, and what its prospects are, okay? So one thing that's very interesting, just for like sociologists, like what I am, professor of sociology, is that you have this religious kind of renaissance, revival throughout Asia, in People's Republic of China, but also in Taiwan. And this basically contradicts one of the fundamental pillars of modern social science, this idea about secularization. One of the most fundamental theories is when you have modern society, it becomes secular. People give up, belief in God and so forth. And in fact, that's wrong. It hasn't happened that way. It obviously hasn't happened. And what's happened in Asia and in China and Taiwan are examples of it not happening. The remarkable religious revivals in China of all kinds. I'll show a few pictures, just a few about that in a few minutes. And this was, people basically assumed that religion in China, mainland China, PRC, was gone because the communists had suppressed it, or atheist government, and it was wiped out after the Cultural Revolution. And so it was really been a tremendous surprise for secular social scientists to see it just kind of rebound to this degree. It actually was even a surprise to many like Christian missionaries I know. Because many of them said, you know, in China, a lot of these Christians we converted, they were basically rice Christians, you know, they weren't well educated and so forth. They had all this persecution by the communists, it was gone. But in fact, many of these people had really, you know, kept the faith in a very, very touching, inspiring ways. And so, and other forms of religious life also sprang back into life again in China. So that's really quite remarkable. So even religious people didn't think it would revive, but it has. In Taiwan, I think people, scholars, basically would assume that when Taiwan made this transition to being an industrial society, urban society, and so forth, especially in the last generation or so, that religion would fall off. Religion was, you know, obviously in Taiwan, there was all this folk religion, rural religion, but once people came to the city and, you know, got education, scientific and everything, then the religion would die out. But that didn't happen in Taiwan either. There have been remarkable kind of transformations of religion in Taiwan, especially among the urban middle classes. So I want to, you know, illustrate some of this as I go along. Now, although there's been this growth in religion in both the People's Republic of China and in Taiwan, it takes different forms and has a different character to it. There's first of all a difference in relationship between religion and the state, and the government. And then there's also an issue of the kinds of religion that have come to flourish. So basically in China, the relationship between religion and the government is rocky, it's tension-filled, okay? There's all sorts of problems, all sorts of issues, which also raises important human rights concerns and everything, which you read about. And in Taiwan, the relationship is basically good. There are obviously always tensions of some kind, but basically good. In China, the government feels it has to control the religion very, very strongly. Partly because it fears it'll be sort of chaos if they ever let the lid off and these different groups all went to do their own thing. Whereas in Taiwan, basically the growth and transformation of these various forms of religion have been, I argue, on balance, a positive factor in the consolidation of Taiwanese democracy, okay? Which in itself is kind of remarkable feat, because in many other parts of the world, when religious movements do arise in the context of new freedom and so forth, what you see happen is that these movements basically are like pouring gasoline on fires of ethnic conflict and, you know, regional conflict and so forth. In the Middle East, you see this especially. And in Taiwan, in its transition to democracy, certainly has its share of conflicts between native Taiwanese and mainlanders and different regions and all that. And overall, the religious revivals have been like pouring some water, at least, on some of these potential conflicts, not like pouring gasoline on them. And so that's a very interesting development too. And it's worth exploring and seeing why and how that worked. Well, let me just very quickly, I have just a few pictures. First of mainland China. But I'll just go through the Chinese part very quickly and to get to the Taiwan part. But to show you this, some of the revival and show you some of the conflicts between the religion and the state, etc. Okay? So this is actually something positive. What this is actually is in Shanghai. That's the tomb of Xu Guangqi, which is the government actually built this urban park next to where Xu Guangqi was buried, which is shows a certain positive attitude toward this, missionary encounter between Matteo Ricci and Guangqi. Let's see how I can move the. Okay, good. There is a picture of Ricci and Guangqi in this park. Limato. And there's the Church of St. Ignatius, the big Jesuit cathedral in Shanghai. There's the church on a Sunday, just a regular Sunday, but you see it's all full of people, packed basically. And it's a big cathedral. Those were 2008, 2009. Those particular pictures. They got new stained glass windows in there. This is another church in Xiamen. This is Dominican church, and the Dominicans and the Jesuits had terrible fight over this so-called rights controversy because the Jesuits wanted to adapt the faith more to the Chinese culture. The Dominicans said that was wrong. It ended up exploding, and the missionaries got thrown out of China after that. A real mess. But that's a Dominican church in Xiamen. The Dominicans were more in Fujian, in that area, which then some of them went over to Taiwan eventually. Okay, and there's a few other. Now this revival of folk religion in China. This is officially a museum because the government won't say it's a temple, but it's to this person Lin Qiangru, who was in the Warring States period. He was the prime minister of the state of Zhao, and he was known as a grand Confucian, scholar and so forth. And the government now has put up this museum. All the people in that village are named Lin. They all claim they're descended from him. And there's a picture of him in the museum and a famous thing. But see, they're actually they have this planchette. This is the thing they use to do the spirit writing, And so this is supposed to be a government museum, but basically it's a temple, and they're burning incense to him and everything. So religion grows up, but it has to be under sort of a cover of being some sort of museum or something. There's another temple. This is a different one. This is built up because there's this woman she's 80 some years old, and she has, or people think she has these healing powers, and she heals people, and they're very grateful for her healing them. And these people she's healed all contribute money, and they built this huge, massive temple up the countryside. They have all these different folk deities there. And this is another temple. This thing is actually an ancestor hall, an ancestor temple of a rich man in Wenzhou. It also is officially labeled community center, not an ancestor hall, but it's ancestor hall. And this is the main altar. This is underneath it. They have all his the tablets to all his ancestors of his family going way back. That's the ancestor. That's a school that this rich man has built. This is kind of a Taoist temple going back from the Ming Dynasty. That's the Taoist priest there. This is a Wenzhou. There's all the people contributing money. And this temple basically is, one of its deities is a dragon boat god. And when they have the Dragon Boat Festival, the Duanwujie, they bring all the boats are going to race to see the mother boat, which is the big boat up there, and they kind of praise this mother boat and so forth. And they set rules of engagement for the race. But then Christianity is expanding very rapidly. This is a Protestant church. This is the Catholic seminary in Shijiazhuang. This is like a Catholic side chapel. This is an example of that little chapel. that woman there is a nun, a Catholic nun, and what she was doing was sort of outside what was legally permitted. And so these nuns, they had a center in a village in this area in Hebei province where all the women in this village, they went to the local hospital to give birth to their babies. And the hospital gave them blood that was tainted with HIV. And so they all have HIV/AIDS and a total mess. And so the nuns have a center trying to give them help, both material help, AIDS medicine and so forth, well, kind of spiritual, psychological kind of help. And it's really terrible. A lot of them have died. The kids have AIDS too, but are kind of orphans and no one takes, anyways. But the government doesn't want anyone to know about this because they messed up so badly. So they threw the nuns out. They won't allow them to do that. And so the nuns are doing it anyway, huh?
Is that giving the blood with HIV intentionally or?
No, unintentionally, just incompetence. That's basically incompetence. Okay, and so those nuns were carrying this work on anyway, even though the government sort of forbade it. And that other woman there was a farm woman who has HIV, and she was coming to get some sort of help from that nun. So, and this here, now there's another example of Catholic church. This is underground church, and it says, "Long live the Pope," and they have their own church here. And what happened a few years ago was this village, they built a very nice church, very beautiful Catholic church, they told me, and the government came in and tore it down. People are furious. There's a big empty lot there, and so they converted some of these kind of farmhouses into kind of their own church, and there's the sanctuary of it, and there's some of the priests there. So. You see, okay, so that's what I have about China, and now we'll talk about Taiwan, okay? But the main, one of the main points I was going to just make from those brief slides was there's a very complicated and basically conflict-filled relationship with the government. In some places in China, the government sort of is okay, like with the park to Xuguangqi and Weiqi. But in other cases, it can be very, very harsh. There's a tension between the sort of officially controlled church and, for that matter, Buddhist associations and so forth, which are all controlled by these patriotic Chinese Catholic Association, this so-called Three Self Association, which is for the Protestants, and a patriotic Chinese Buddhist Association and so forth, which puts tight control over these churches, basically allows them to open certain venues for worship, but then also restricts how many converts they can make, and doesn't want any lay people to be active and so forth. And so there's some pretty severe restrictions. But then the people are avoiding these restrictions and doing, carrying out their kind of worship practices in all sorts of different ways, sometimes under the cover of things like saying this is a museum, sometimes basically just defying the government by setting up this underground Catholic church, even though the government had torn down their main structure and all that. And so forth. So there's this kind of conflict relationship, and the religious movements keep on, moving along anyway. But one interesting thing about China in terms of the content of the religion is the most dynamic, probably, developments and forms are those of Christianity. Like Dr. Lin said, right? Like Yang Fenggang from Purdue University said, China maybe is on the way to becoming the most populous Christian nation in the world in another generation. I'm not so sure I accept that, actually. But the rate of Christian growth has been extremely rapid, especially among Protestant Christians. There were less than 1 million before 1949, and then all suppressed and persecuted. And then after 1980, it just exploded. So it's been growing at an extremely rapid rate. So maybe there's 60 million now. Yang Fenggang thinks there'll be 160 another 10, 20 years. I kind of think that maybe it'll sort of plateau out and won't keep on going and going and going. But that's another topic. In any case, it's been very rapid, that kind of growth, and the government's very worried about it, trying to suppress it and choke it off. One thing it's tried to do is it's more tolerant of this kind of local folk religion because they think this will kind of choke out the growth of Christians. In any case, the growth of Christianity is probably one of the big stories in China today. Now in Taiwan, it's somewhat different. As I said, the relationship between religion and the government is really not bad. Basically, it's overall quite cooperative. And I think religion has contributed to the kind of consolidation of Taiwan's democracy. But then the kinds of religion that have flourished in Taiwan lately, there's a contrast with China. In China, Buddhism is, there's a lot of revival of Buddhist temples, but the government is very strict about Buddhists having any large lay organizations and things connected with it, and also tries to keep the monastic Sangha under control. But in Taiwan, some of the most remarkable kind of growth and transformation in religious life has been with the Buddhists and also with some forms of Taoists. And Christianity overall has declined in Taiwan. A big notable exception, of course, and the most important exception, a very important one, is the Taiwanese Presbyterian Church. That's still doing quite well. But other Christian denominations, certainly including the Catholics, have just declined. There was this rapid growth in conversions during the 1950s and early 60s, and then it just collapsed, basically. And now these churches, for the Catholics at least in Taiwan, you go to these nice churches, and basically most of the people there are actually Filipinos or Filipinas, domestic workers and so forth, not local Taiwanese. So, and a lot of those Christian churches, some of the energy seems to have gone out of it. Again, with the Presbyterian Church being an important exception. Okay. So the real remarkable growth is in Buddhism. And I wrote this book about this called Democracy's Dharma. And I focused on, in that book at least, on three major Buddhist organizations, although there's some others in Taiwan. But the first was Fo Guangshan, Buddha's Light Mountain. And Buddha's Light Mountain, founded by the monk named Xingyun, who came over from China, Zhejiang province, and after 1949, basically started out Yilan. Eventually, in 1968, established this temple in near Kaohsiung, and now it's a huge temple. He has a huge number of followers, and of course, branches and all around, including in the Xilai Temple here in Hacienda Heights in Los Angeles, but also centers and all around the world, including Africa, Europe, and so forth and so on. And he's he's now in his like mid-80s, but extremely popular figure. He goes around like in Asia and gives these Dharma talks, these sermons before crowds that fill big football stadiums, with tens and thousands of people. And it seems to me, I've met him, and I studied his movement. He reminds me a little bit in the kind of Christian context of someone like Billy Graham, okay? And not necessarily the most profound theologian in the world, but extremely good speaker, extremely well organized, and just knows how to kind of reach people. And he does all sorts of things with media and has put out all these books, etc. And he's inspired, very, very large numbers of people. And besides, in Kaohsiung, in that main temple, which is really huge complex, there's about 1,300 or more monks and nuns there. About 2/3 nuns, the other third, males. And this is a time when, say, in the United States, people who have a calling to become like a nun or a priest. The numbers are going way down. But in Taiwan, it's continued to grow. But besides these monastics, there are a large lay organization. There's a so-called Buddhist Light Association, which is, they say, the third largest voluntary association in the world after the Rotary Club and some other thing, which actually is officially headquartered in Los Angeles because it can't get recognition as a kind of an official NGO because in Taiwan, so they have to have a headquarters in LA to give it that kind of standing. But in any case, they around the world, they're extremely active lay people connected with the Buddhist Light Mountain. Another temple was the Dharma Drum Mountain, Fagushan. That was founded by the monk named Shengyan, who passed away a couple of years ago. And it's based in, there's a temple called the Nongchan Si based in Taipei. But then outside of Taipei, going up toward Keelung, there's this mountain called Dharma Drum Mountain. And there's a very big monastery there and also a university. And Foguanshan too has several universities. One in Yilan, one I think is in Jiayi, and then they have the Foguang University in Kaohsiung itself, and then of course they have the Xilai University here in Los Angeles, and so forth. So they have major universities. The Fagushan Dharma Drum Mountain emphasizes especially kind of reaching out to intellectuals. And lots of scholars I know, like at the Academia Sinica, et cetera, are very, involved in that. They have all sorts of study groups and sessions about, various aspects of Buddhism, and Shengyan himself had a PhD in Buddhist studies from Japan, and he has several 100,000 followers in Taiwan. And a monastery of maybe a couple hundred monks up there in Dharma Drum Mountain. So that's also, it's really quite impressive. And they also have a monastery and a Buddhist center in New York, a smaller center in Queens, and then a big place up in upstate New York. So both Foguanshan and this Dharma Drum Mountain are global as well as just local institutions in Taiwan, and attracting large numbers of followers, many of whom very intellectual, in intellectual life or in professional life, etc. Then the third group I studied was this organization, Tzu, and that photo there is second, sorry. Of headquarters, of Tzu in Hualien, and there are about 100 nuns, Buddhist nuns. It was founded by a nun, Master Shengyan, who is a Taiwanese, born in Taichung. And she had a kind of a life crisis when she was about 21 years old, and her father died suddenly. And she went off into the mountains, and she wanted to become a Buddhist nun. There was no one to ordain her, so she shaved her head by herself and declared herself a nun. Then later on, she met this famous Yin Shun, who was a famous kind of propagator of so-called this humanistic, socially engaged Buddhism. And comes from the mainland, but he comes to Taiwan. He ordains her. She sets up this small little temple in the Hualien, and then later it's consolidated to this Jingsi She, this Still Thoughts monastery. So there are about 100 nuns there. But more important than that is the way in which she's built a huge lay community. So Tzu has about 4 million followers. And followers are people who basically contribute a little bit of money every month to the organization, so they have lots and lots of money. And there are different circles. There's some that just contribute a few dollars a month, but then maybe volunteer in important, occasions. But then there are others who become these so-called commissioners. There are about 20,000 of them now, who are extremely dedicated, who spend, much of their time and energy basically doing things with Tzu Chi, which mainly involves helping the poor and the sick and so forth. I must keep moving this thing forward. I'm sorry. Here's that's Master Zhengyan, and those are some of those so-called commissioners. The women wear this distinctive navy blue dress or navy blue shirt when they're doing this Tzu Chi work, and they're getting something from the master right there. Here, let's see. Here's me, and that's my wife, and that's Master Zhengyan.
How old is she?
She's about 75 now. And those are two commissioners. One interesting thing about one of the women is that one of them is going to be become like a Buddhist nun, but more like a Catholic nun. That is, she's going to take all the vows of Buddhist nun, be celibate and so forth, but not going to, shave her head and so forth and wear these robes, because she wants to get out there in the community and kind of help people. Because the important characteristic of this is it's supposed to be Buddhism engaged in the world. And you leave the world, through enlightenment, by entering the world is their main thing. So what you do is not just for Tzu Chi, but also for Fo Guang Shan and the others, is you basically fulfill the Buddhist precepts by entering the world to make the world a better place, a more loving place, a more caring place, just a better place. They do it in somewhat different ways, although they overlap a lot. Tzu Chi does it especially with helping poor and sick in various ways. So it's Buddhism in the world. And there are different ways they do this. The main thing is Tzu Chi became famous in the 1980s because that Master Zhengyan decided that Hualien, where she was at the time, was very underserved. And she thought that they needed very much a hospital there, mostly Aborigines in the area, poor. So she raised money to build a hospital. And she became famous because she succeeded in getting the resources together and building this hospital. It's now a first-rate hospital. Now they have at least 3 hospitals in Taiwan. But they have clinics all around. They have one here in Alhambra, for example. A big feature of theirs is using medicine to help people. They have a medical school and a nursing college, now a university connected with Tzu Chi in Hualien. And besides doing that, they become famous by going around the world helping people who are victims of various kinds of disasters. And in 1990, they went kind of global. And they basically, they go everywhere. I mean, and the basic idea is that you kind of achieve this Buddhist cultivation by expanding your heart, by reaching out to people who are different from yourself. So it's easy to give to your family and close friends, but you try to cultivate yourself by pushing yourself to reach out to people who are not like you, even your enemies. And so they've given help. They go to North Korea, lots and lots of help to mainland China, like when they had the Sichuan earthquake and so forth. But they've gone everywhere in Asia, Southeast Asia, Indonesia during the tsunami, Philippines, Malaysia, Bangladesh. They've been in Rwanda and Kosovo after these human disasters there. Of course, in USA, and Hurricane Katrina and disasters like that. LA wildfires. They're there giving out aid and help and so forth. And so the idea is to kind of expand your heart by reaching out to wider and wider
groups of people, and in charity and love. So that's the spirit. And again, this is just an example of what's also common in these other kinds of Buddhist groups I talked about. Another thing involves transforming the doctrine so as to enable this kind of engagement with the world. So one way they do this is they call it 生活化, basically adaptation to life. And it involves to some degree kind of watering down certain kind of Buddhist precepts. So for example, the first precept, of course, in Buddhism, is you're not supposed to kill any living thing, any sentient being. And in the monastery itself, they're very strict about that. They won't even kill a mosquito or an ant, But then when I went to the medical school and asked them, well, this is, do you do, animal experimentation? They said, of course, this is scientific medicine we practice, and to do this, you have to, experiment with animals. And the master said it's all right as long as you treat the animal humanely, and it's being done to make medicine better for it and save people's lives and so forth. And so they experiment on animals and kill the animal in the process and so forth. And so that's kind of watering it down. But then after the watering down comes an attempt to lift the world up to some of their standards. So they do this in different ways. And okay, so one way was the picture I just showed, that particular one was about 3 years ago. That was, okay, what that picture was one way they tried to kind of lift up the world to them, in this case, medical practice. So, one way they do it in their hospital was they try to kind of develop and cultivate a kind of a Buddhist-inspired attitude toward life and death. So one thing they have in the hospital that they've been pioneers with in Taiwan is a hospice care. And so they have this palliative care unit, this hospice, on top of the hospital. Normally here in USA, you separate hospice from hospital, right? Dying hospitals don't deal with that, right? But they have it integrated into the hospital itself. And so it's for terminally ill patients. And this particular room, it gives you an example of kind of their spirit, is actually a room in the hospice in which patients who are in their last hours go. And they have this room and with nice bed and space so the family can come and be around them and so forth. And then they have these cabinets here, and so they're very ecumenical. So if the person's a Christian, they open up this one with Jesus, and they have a priest come in and so forth, say prayers. If the person's a Buddhist, they have here, Guanyin, Pusa, and so forth, and they have Buddhist, nun will come in and pray and so forth. So they're very open to all kinds of things. And I went with them once to visit the sick. They go and have these little visits, and we went to this Aborigine woman. She had AIDS, actually, this woman, and they tried to cheer her up and give her food and so forth. And but then they said, we got to sing some songs to her, but she's a Catholic. She's not a Buddhist, so no Buddhist song. So let's sing some Christian songs, so forth. So they have no problem in kind of meeting people where they are, and to give them aid and comfort and so forth when they're in trouble. And another way in which they try to lift up the practice of medicine is in their medical training. And one of the things they're very, very proud of is their anatomy class in their medical school. And the anatomy class basically is taught by having the doctors to be dissect human cadavers. It's very difficult in Taiwan to get people to donate their bodies for this purpose, but they actually have a lot because of the way in which they handle it and they do it. First of all, they have the classroom where the class takes place at the top of the medical school, not in the basement, and overlooking a beautiful garden. And they say these prayers when they begin to the deceased person, and then when the physicians or the students work on the body, there they have these little biographies of the person that they're working on. So they call it their silent teacher, silent mentor, and they have a little account written there about their life and who they were and so forth and so on. So it kind of humanizes this kind of process, and so the young physician training see themselves as not just doing a kind of technical thing, but there's a matter of personhood and so forth engaged there. This particular room, by the way, is not the actual anatomy class. It's a separate one, which is for they have enough cadavers that they can use it to train people in surgical procedures. So it's set up like an operating room in a hospital. So people can try out or practice a certain kind of procedure before they actually try it out on a live person. And most medical schools, they can't do that because there are not enough cadavers for it. But Tzu-Chi Hospital has it. It actually makes the training more realistic and so forth. So and then what they do is when they're finished with the cadaver, they have a very solemn kind of ceremony, and the students act as kind of pallbearers for this, the cadaver, and the body then is cremated, and they give half the ashes back to the family, and then they keep half the ashes there in this chapel next to the classroom where they do the anatomy class, and so the students and the doctors come in and they pray and meditate before this and give thanks to the people who contributed their bodies and so forth, and think of them and so forth. And so this is kind of lifting up the practice of medicine, sort of humanizing it, even as they've made some compromises in the use of animal experimentation and so forth, bringing it down to earth. So in the various kinds of things that they do, they try to kind of reach out to people where they are in ecumenical fashion, and to raise up their consciousness and to make them more open and loving and so forth, and to have a deeper appreciation about the dignity of the person and so forth, and connection between life and death and all those kinds of things. So they pray for the animals. That's a good question. I'm not sure if they pray for the animal, if they kill the animal. But anyway, and there's me. Okay, that's giving a talk to the nuns. I gave a talk to the nuns there. See, they all sit on the floor like that and so forth, and they asked me to share some ideas with them, etc. So that's an example of the Tzu-Chi group. But what I said about them could also be applied to in different ways to some of those other Buddhist groups that I talked about. So it involves taking Buddhism and first of all adapting it in ways that fit both the lifestyle and the kind of understandings and vision of kind of modern, middle class people. People versed in science, medicine, and so forth, and adapting it partly to that, but also trying to lift up the practice in sort of humanistic ways. It also involves trying to reach out to wider and wider circles of people, and reach out not so much to convert them, but to both understand them and sort of embrace them in their various kinds of need. So that is a fairly interesting and impressive development, which is really changing the face of especially urban Taiwan, and has global reach because Tzu-Chi now, of course, has a place in Monrovia here, a center. They have this free clinic in Alhambra. They have a new center in San Dimas here, but they took over from the Catholics. That was the Catholic seminary, but the Catholics had trouble, they had some sex abuse scandal, they had to pay out a lot of money, they had to sell the place, so now Tzu-Chi has bought it and have the place in San Dimas, right? So, and they have a center in San Diego devoted especially to ecology. They're also very concerned about saving the environment and so forth. So Anyway, so all these groups have global reach, expand the vision, involve adapting to the world as well as living up the world. And this is sort of taking place and kind of flourished in a place like Taiwan. Now, overall, I think the net effect of this has been to sort of create bonds, affiliations of care and concern that have helped soothe some of the tensions in Taiwan society, and I think have made this transition to democracy viable. Taiwan always seems on the edge of chaos in its political life, but there's enough of a shared trust and so forth that it doesn't come apart like many new democracies have, and that's an extremely impressive thing. Now, so then what I want to ask is why this happened in Taiwan, why the situation is different in Taiwan than in China. And at first I thought, well, you know, Taiwan, they have religious freedom and China doesn't have religious freedom. But that's not really the case. So in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, Taiwan didn't really have religious freedom either. Basically, the Kuomintang controlled religion the same way that the Communist Party does in China. That is, they had these associations, a sort of Buddhist association for the Buddhists of the Republic of China. They had a Taoist association. They controlled who could become, you know, leading monks or leaders. They used the clout of that organization to make sure that Buddhism and the Tao didn't expand very far, especially they never wanted to expand in a way that would create large groups of lay people that would encompass all of Taiwan, because they wanted to keep everything kind of localized. They didn't want the Buddhist or the Taoist to develop intellectually either. So they wouldn't allow them to have, say, universities, a Buddhist university or Taoist university, so to keep them under control. So basically, the policy was very much the same as that in mainland China. The one big exception was the case of Christianity. So they allowed the Christians, for example, to have universities. The Catholics had Furen, the Protestants had Donghai. They allowed a certain kind of freedom of motion for the Christians, partly because, I think, not just partly, but mainly because of the Cold War. Because a lot of Taiwan government's biggest supporters, at least in the USA, were old missionaries and so forth, and they couldn't afford to be seen as, you know, opposed to Christianity. Chiang Kai-shek, of course, was a Christian himself. I'm not sure his own personal belief was as important as his strategic, you know, issues about the Cold War. In any case, so Christians got some favorable treatment, and the Buddhists, the Taoists, they didn't. So the way in which the groups I studied there then came into being and rose up was that they were basically founded by mavericks, by monks, and in Zheng Yan's case, none, who didn't belong to this Buddhist Association of the Republic of China, who worked outside its framework. And they could partly get away with doing that because they first went to fairly remote places in Taiwan. So Xingyun from Foguanshan went to Yilan, which at that time and was pretty removed. Zheng Yan was in Hualien, and Xingyun and Shengyan from Dharma Drum Mountain actually he went off to Japan to study. He came back in the late 1970s. So they were removed from the control of this, and they sort of built their organization in the cracks of that authoritarian, repressive society, under the radar screen. So no one could notice and see them. They were off in the middle of nowhere, and they didn't seem very significant. But because of that, they also had a certain kind of authenticity, and the people they did attract were very devoted to them and to their vision. So then in the late 1970s, as Taiwan society got more complex, beginning industrialization, the government itself began to recognize a need to call upon religious groups to help in providing things like social services and social aid to people in a more complex kind of society. The government couldn't do it by itself anymore. So, for example, they gave awards to people who helped people poor in need and victims of disasters. They gave a major award to Tzu Chi, actually, under Jiang Jingguo in 1976 or so. The government began to realize they could sort of needed these people. And then they also gave help in getting them moving further along. So Tzu Chi, for example, when they built that hospital in Hualien, part of the story is the energy of this master Zheng Yan in getting it going. But the land for that hospital actually was donated by the government in Hualien. It was an old military land that they gave. At the opening ceremony to lay the foundations of this hospital, when the dignitary was Li Denghui. At that time, he was the provincial governor of Taiwan. So there was, association with the government, positive from the beginning. So then, what happened was in 1987, when the martial law was given up, and Taiwan became this movement toward democracy, I think there was a tremendous kind of upsurge in what we call civil society. People wanting to join groups of all kinds, It was like very exciting for them. And every kind of group you can think of, started to flourish at the time. Some of them were kind of disruptive or single issue. There were feminist groups, ecology groups, there were independence groups, all this kind of thing. And actually, in many ways, it looked like the society was going to tear itself apart, which often happens in these kind of transitions. But then also people flocked to these religious groups like Tzu Chi, like Fo Guangshan, because I think for some people it felt safe to do that, and they had this energy they wanted to kind of use to kind of expand themselves and help others and so forth. And the groups were solid and had a good reputation, and so they grew explosively. So the huge explosive growth in all these groups came after 1987, and the growth has sort of continued down to the present. So there was that. But for Christianity, with the exception of the Presbyterian Church, which had deep roots in Taiwan and have been very devoted to a sense of Taiwan, nationhood and so forth for a long, long time, and it suffered because of it, that did okay. But for a lot of the other Christians, precisely because they had been favored by the government, by the Kuomintang back in the 1950s and 60s, I think people thought that they weren't really, authentic, representations of the spirit of the Taiwanese people, and they were more attracted to these Buddhist groups because they seemed to come right out of Taiwan soil. So that's how I would explain the prevalence of this Buddhism and Taoism rather than of Christianity during this period of new expansion and growth in the 1980s and 90s and down to the present. So then what function do these groups have? I think besides providing an outlet for people who want to use their energy to help others and also to give fundamental meaning in their life, they also, I think, deep down express a certain kind of nationalism in Taiwan. And I think their situation is connected to the Taiwan government's, situation in the world today. In many places, especially in Asia, the government, the state, is supposed to be kind of the representation of a nation's highest moral ideals and, its hopes and so forth for the world. But the Taiwan government, the Taiwan state, can't really do that. For one thing, it's not recognized as a state by, most other countries in the world. For another thing, it's in this strange situation, of course, where most of the people in Taiwan want some autonomy. They don't want to be absorbed into China, but most don't really want to have war with China either. So there have to be various kinds of compromises and so forth to sort of keep this delicate balance. And there's no right way to do that. People go too far, like Ma Ying-jeou, and people are upset about that. But then Chen Shui-bian had his own problems. And so the government basically is seen as a necessary evil that basically represents people's compromises, not their ideals. It represents managing their fear, not their hopes. And but groups like these Buddhist groups, Tzu Chi and Fo Guang and the others, represent the people in Taiwan at its best. Generous, cosmopolitan, looking out toward the world, caring, expressing ideals which are especially kind of made in Taiwan. And they kind of represent the feeling, I think, of a nation, which the government can't do. And I think that in its own way is their one of their key contributions to Taiwan. And they represent a certain kind of nationalism, which I call more ecumenical nationalism, not the kind of aggressive, form of Taiwan nationalism, but one that wants to be peaceful in the world, living up to its ideals, but solve its problems peacefully. So when I was studying this Tzu Chi in 1999, it was during the Taiwan elections, and all the politicians have to come see these Buddhist monks as part of the campaign. They had to sit down and talk about values and so forth and so on. And so when I was there, Liu Xiulian, Annette Liu came. She was running for vice president, and so they had this dialogue with Master Zhengyan, and they let me sit right next to them, and they had the media and all that, and so I was sitting next to, and it was really quite, really interesting, because here he had two very strong women, but they're strong in different ways, okay? But they're both very, very strong, but different kinds of strength. And actually, Master Zhengyan seemed actually quite nervous. I could see her hands under the table, and she was kind of shaking and so forth. But her face was extremely calm and serene. And that Liu was very, was forceful. And she said to Zhengyan, you are so wise. You're not like Jiang Zemin of China, who's treated Taiwan so badly. We had this earthquake that didn't give us any aid and so forth. And you have compassion, generosity to everybody. And Master Zhengyan said to Li Xiulian, we Buddhists believe that everybody has some love in their hearts. And that includes Jiang Zemin. And you shouldn't just curse him. You should, we should care for him, and we should try to, bring out his best qualities and so forth. So they have a different kind of attitude toward this kind of relationship, right? And which I thought was very interesting, and kind of, it's Taiwan nationalism, but of a kind that's more kind of accommodating and more generous than the more aggressive sort of narrow kinds. So I thought that too was interesting. Now I thought, what does this say about the future of China? In a way, Taiwan was a very authoritarian country in the 50s and 60s, and it had this kind of evolution. Would this be possible in China, in PRC? And I gave a talk about this in China, and there was this guy who was the head of the Buddhist section from the Academy of Social Sciences there. It's Wang Zhiyuan, and he was very excited. I didn't realize he liked it. He was very excited. He said, this is what's going to happen in China. And I said, in Chinese, 可能, could be. And he said, 必然. It has to be, it certainly be that way, right? And so I myself am sort of in between, 可能 and 必然. I'm not sure, but this kind of thing could happen too. In any case, there are people in China very interesting about it. But why it happened in Taiwan had to do with these special circumstances, but also to the kind of good leadership of some of these monks and religious leaders, I thought, and from Christian perspective, we call it the grace of God. In I suppose Buddhism, they call it good karma, right? But in any case, it happened in a way you can't predict what's going to happen elsewhere. But maybe something like that, a more positive, soft landing, could happen in China today. But I don't know. Okay, so that's all I have to say at the moment. Do you have any? I'd love to have questions.